Kafka wrote 3 novels and many short stories. Here I'll summarize and discuss his 3 novels and 3 short stories. America, or The Man Who Disappeared, is an incomplete novel published posthumously in 1927, but it was written in 1912, so considered Kafka's first novel. It is the story of Karl, a 16-year-old naive but good-hearted European who is forced to flee to America after getting an older servant pregnant. In America, he makes a few friends, some good, but most of them exploit him or gets him into trouble with those in position of power. At first, he stays at his uncle's house where life couldn't be better. His future looks very promising, but then suddenly thrown out for visiting his friend without permission. Later, Karl manages to get a job, but dismissed for breaking the rules. At the end, he gets a job at a theater, but we don't know what happens to him. At least we know that by the end, he's still alive and things are looking up. It is Kafka's only story that ends in happiness of sort. As I mentioned in my video on Italo Calvino, America was his favorite novel of all time. As the first novel, we can see that Kafka was still optimistic about the world. There is a hint of Dickens in this novel. Karl's uncle happens to be in America and randomly meets him. Kafka himself confesses that his inspiration for America came from Charles Dickens. This story does appear like a young man going to America to make a life for himself and pursuing the American dream, just like in Dickens' novels Great Expectations or David Copperfield. Karl is not a very strong character as there are bigger forces or tides in which he drifts around. This novel is less Kafkaesque. America is the only attempt Kafka made to escape. America is the land of freedom. After this novel, Kafka gave up any hope of freedom. Now we enter into Kafka's nightmare world. We need a candle. It's really dark. The Trial was published in 1925, but it was written in 1914 or thereabout. If America was inspired by Charles Dickens, The Trial was clearly a novel in the mold of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I should also point out that this novel is also incomplete. What is the story? Joseph K., a simple banker, is arrested for a crime he doesn't know he has committed, and by people who never identify themselves. If that's not weird enough, he's not even sent to prison, so he's free while trying to work his case. Justice is twisted here. It's his job to prove himself innocent, not the authorities to prove him guilty. He gets a lawyer who happens to make things much more difficult for him and almost becomes like a slave master the way he controls his clients. He then approaches other people to help him, but nobody is able to. Finally, on his 35th birthday, Joseph is arrested again by 2 men and executed outside the city without he ever finding out what his crime was. Joseph K. feels he deserved the punishment despite not knowing what his crime is. Dostoevsky at least told us about Raskolnikov's crime and the detectives who worked the case. Kafka turns things upside down and takes us into a complete nightmare where we don't know what's going on. We follow Joseph K. as he struggles to find out his case. At some point, I had the feeling that he wasn't arrested at all. Instead, he was following the police and claiming that he was, perhaps seeking attention. Joseph moves through space like almost in a dream, suspended, always in limbo, as if life itself is a sentence. I think Kafka is telling us that life itself is a trial. We have to prove our worth in society. We are only treated well if we can prove that we are innocent, useful, and keeping our heads low and working hard. If not, you're discarded by the system in the same way ants and bees discard useless members in their colony. Bureaucracy has replaced human discretion and has become a labyrinth or a maze to discipline, normalize, and control individuals. In big cities, you cannot deal with people on a face-to-face basis. Good luck picking a phone and calling a customer service of any big company. They have set up a system that treats everyone the same, therefore rigid rules can appear arbitrary and cruel to an individual. But it makes sure the city runs smoothly, so the plight of the single individual is not its concern. Just like in an ants colony, individual ants are worthless. Nations are a close mimic of an ant colony. Individuals are sacrificed for the good of the system, authority, colony, and country. Dostoevsky put the blame on the individual to take responsibility for their crimes and mistakes. Kafka puts the blame on the system for inventing crimes to punish individuals. Modern world and its intricate bureaucracy and specialization has stripped the individuals of any power to influence things. The nightmare continues in Kafka's other novel, The Castle. The Castle was written in 1922 when Kafka was in a hotel recovering from TB, so the remote location of the setting perhaps alludes to the hotel location. The Castle is also incomplete and published in 1926. By now you might have guessed that Kafka actually didn't complete any of his novels. Unlike his other novels which he gave up finishing, Kafka failed to finish The Castle because he died at the hotel. The Castle is about a land surveyor who thinks he has been invited by someone in the castle to do a job, but upon arrival he's told that the request was a mistake. But he lingers around in the village trying to find the person who requested his service. It's a futile effort of a man who moves into a village and wants to be recognized by authorities. It is a closed village, especially to those coming from town. Just like in the trial, here too the protagonist desperately tries to live in the village legally but unable to find ways to achieve it. Here the court system is replaced with a village and a castle, perhaps alluding to a more older time when empires and kings ruled places. In the trial, the court system alludes to modern world where authority has become faceless. In the castle too, Kay never manages to meet the authorities, the people in charge. Unlike in the trial, where we don't know the location, we get to know the remote rural location of the castle in the winter. The village seems like a typical village. It has two hotels, a 5-star called Castle Inn and a cheap hotel called Bridge Inn. Here, the idea of community and sense of belonging is very central, and the main motivation for Kay as he tries to avoid solitude that is depicted in the trial. Kay tries many different ways to go to the castle, or contact it, or understand it, or enter it, but always fails. There are millions of obstacles. It is like an outsider in a circle and nobody wants to include you. The castle is like an old language that Kay is trying to decipher. The title in German also means lock. It's perhaps human attempt to get to the truth, implying that it's impossible to find the truth, religious or scientific truth. Human society is like a tangled web of bureaucracy and legal system that makes the individual powerless and defeated. Kobo Abe's novel The Woman in the Dunes is very similar. A man accidentally arrives at a village and gets tangled in a web of sand that he never manages to get out, like an ant stuck in something. Now I will look at 3 of his most famous short stories. The Metamorphosis was written in 1912, published in 1915, is the first on the list that was completed by Franz Kafka. But years after its publication, he said he didn't like the ending and wished he could change it. In the Metamorphosis, just like in the Ovid's Metamorphosis of the Roman period, a human turns into an animal. In Kafka's story, Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman, wakes up to find himself turned into an insect or vermin, something repulsive. Initially, he hopes that this is a temporary state, but as days pass, he slowly realizes that this is no nightmare, it's real, that he is no longer human. Unable to leave his room, he reflects on his job and those around him, and his desperate situation as the sole breadwinner of the family. His absence at work alerts his boss, who sends someone to visit him. His family and colleagues fail to communicate with him. His father tries to keep him inside the room, and the process injures him twice. Only his sister, Greta, brings food for him. Then one day, their tenants notice him and they are repulsed. They decide to leave the house without paying rent. Now their financial situation is dire. Gregor's sister, his only close ally, has had enough and tells his father to get rid of it. This realization that he's no longer wanted in the house, Gregor starves himself to death. The family takes a vacation to refresh themselves and plan Greta's wedding. There's a million interpretations of this story. Some say it's religious, some say it's feminist, some say it's a father complex. Nabokov suggested it was a struggle of an artist living in a crappy world. Some say it's not about Gregor at all, it's all about his sister Greta. I personally think a lot of those interpretations seem a bit far-fetched. Just in the Ovid's Metamorphosis, there is a lot of melodrama here. Ovid depicted men as active and women as passive. Kafka turns it upside down and shows how miserable a man who is passive and without a job. Gregor's only function in the family was to provide for them. Without bringing in any food, he is not only useless but also a parasite. Without fulfilling his role as a provider, you might as well be dead. You can see that Kafka was twice engaged to the same woman, and each time he was called off because Kafka was deemed too sickly to be marriage material or a good provider. Kafka was a provider for his own family. However, his future in-laws dismissed him as too sickly to fulfill his masculine role in society. So Gregor Samsa and the Metamorphosis is that any man deemed useless in society. I think Kafka tells us that your value to society or to some extent to your family is only as long as you're a provider, useful and productive member. Once you're no longer able to do that, you have no worth. The Hunger Artist. The Hunger Artist was written in 1922. It's about an artist who impresses people with his ability to fast for days. It's like David Blaine, the magician who went without food for 44 days. After a while, people get bored and watch some animals perform in circus. The Hunger Artist is ignored by everyone, and someone accidentally finds him in a box on the verge of death. He tells people that he shouldn't be admired. Why? His ability to fast was due to him unable to find food that he liked. The story ends with him dying after 40 days of fasting and replaced by a panther with insatiable appetite for food. Kafka himself died soon after writing The Hunger Artist. Throughout history, artistic trends come and go. Great artists often die unrecognized. He survived for days when people were watching him. Artists need an audience to motivate them, sustain them. This is an innate human desire to be admired by others. This mirrors Kafka's own life. During his lifetime, he didn't get the recognition and respect we have for him today. Bucket Writer. It was written in 1917 but published in 1921. The story is about a man so poor that he can fly. On a cold winter day, he sets off to get some coal from the coal dealer, but he has no money to pay. When he arrives at the shop, the coal dealers, the husband and wife, don't notice him. The poor man shouts, but they cannot even hear his voice. He is so poor that he has become invisible, weightless, and inaudible. At the end, he flies away towards the ice mountain and disappears. Poverty means you have nothing, no voice, no weight, and invisible. As we can see in all his stories, Kafka is concerned with a powerless individual against society, usually the authority, the powerful, the mighty. Individuals are usually unjustly and unfairly tossed around like a football. Another theme that runs through his writings is someone arguing his case against somebody. This is partly because of his own experience with his father, who Kafka could never impress, and partly because as a lawyer he always dealt with people pleading their cases. His novels and stories are quite short in comparison to other authors of the same period, like Robert Musil, Thomas Mann, and Marcel Proust, all of whom I have discussed in this channel. That's because he had a full-time job, unlike those other authors who were perhaps more privileged. Despite their short length, they are not easy to read sometimes. They need your full attention like most modernist novels. You can't be passive. If you want to start with something easy, read America, and then read his other novels.